Hey, I'm Zaid Ismail, and to my surprise, I'm actually on episode 49 of my podcast, something that I was skeptical about achieving when I set out on this because I wasn't sure how I was going to have enough to say, and I underestimated how much I've got to say. Seriously, though, today's conversation is about finding excellence and critical thinking in how it is that we conduct ourselves. Why is it that the absence of critical thinking is so widespread, yet we don't have a meaningful response to it? Yet our structures and our infrastructure that we are so proud of, and this is something that has hurt us in a big way, I believe, is how it is that we're constantly celebrating the praises and the virtues of the Islamic or Muslim infrastructure in South Africa, but we don't spend as much time taking stock of the effectiveness of those structures. So we've got good structures, good infrastructure. I'm not dismissing that, right? But we have to hold ourselves accountable for why it is that despite having that, we find our community to be in the state that it's in, to be lagging behind in so many ways, especially in professional ethics, especially in ethics itself, especially in critical thinking and leading the public discourse about how to remedy the wounds of the past, of apartheid, and about the corruption in government and things like that. And we end up subscribing to structures and things because that's just the way it's done. And we don't realize what we actually sign up for when we do that, what we're actually supporting when we do that. So, for example, participating in the democratic process has its merits because you need to have a voice, but at the same time, we don't realize that the way you go about needing to participate, you end up having to chase leadership. You have to campaign for people to support you as a leader. And that in itself is fundamentally wrong because it feeds a completely wrong mindset. And also, it doesn't ensure that we have the ones with the most merit, who are most equipped and informed. We don't have those ones rising to the surface to be leaders. It's all about campaigning. And right there is the problem of why it is that we can't establish a khilafah, right? But we won't talk about that because I think we're a long way off from being ready to talk about that. And the reason we can't talk about that is because, ta-da, we have a lack of critical thinkers in our environment. We have a lack of critical thinkers in the Muslim Ummah. We have a lack of critical thinkers globally because of the dumbing down of human intelligence by mainstream mental health. I'll take a D at mainstream mental health every chance I get because it is such a destructive force right now while everyone is singing its praises and talking about how it's making us reconnect with our humanity and all of that. It's not. It's turned us into pacifists. It's turned us into vessels that are walking around aimlessly looking to feel better about life while not realizing what is our contribution to the very life that we're trying to feel better about. So that's for another day. I want to come back to the critical thinking issue. So one of the questions that I was asked is, what systemic factors contribute to the decline of critical thinking in society, and how can they be addressed at an institutional level? And this is a very good question, right? But it's a very big question, as I'm sure you can appreciate, because when we talk about institutional structures and things like that, we're talking about things that have evolved over a very long period of time. And this is the thing. If you set out with good intention but misinformed substance, you're not going to realize what problem you were trying to solve versus what problem needed to be solved. And then the more credibility and merit that structure gains as it gains traction and momentum and becomes more pervasive, you automatically assume that that's a standard. That's what must lead us through the education of our children, for example. Anyone who's paying attention will know that the education structures, they only serve a very, very small portion of society. And that small portion of society that it does serve are, sadly enough, the ones with the most privilege. There's opportunity for access to that privilege by some of the others in society, and that's where we get our success stories and our rags to riches stories and things like that. But the fact that those are stories that we celebrate means that it's exceptions, it's not the norm. And I'm always curious to know why it is that the norms are not what we want it to be, that we have to celebrate exceptions to inspire others to want to achieve that. Stated differently, Why is it that mediocrity is so celebrated that if you thrive within the context of mediocrity, you celebrate it? So relative to what's mediocre, if you do just marginally better than that, you stand out. Why is our baseline so low? So when we talk about institutional structures and things that contribute to the absence of critical thinkers, there's one thing that completely destroys critical thinking, and that's standardized testing. Now, standardized testing, when it comes to technical subject matter, has its place. But when it comes to equipping people to be critical thinkers, to be able to think for themselves, to be able to figure things out, to nurture their ability to figure life out and to navigate life, standardized testing just tells you that there's only one way to do it. And then if that one way to do it doesn't work for you, then you have to consider that there's something wrong with you because everyone's doing it that way. So when we talk about secular structures and we talk about the education system in that, we have to recognize, like I mentioned also before, is that Islamic schools, no. We have secular schools that have an Islamic ethos with Islamic content in it, but they operate, run, and produce outcomes like secular schools, not Islamic schools. The same with universities, same with the ulums. They've also taken a similar approach where everything has become so academically focused that you lose the essence of what's the wisdom and what's the substance behind what it is that you're actually shaping and grooming and equipping in the students that make it through that system. So when you see an absence of critical thinking in society, you don't just blame society, because that's what we tend to do, right? And it wasn't intended that way from my side. We did come across that way. I'm not just blaming society. I'm saying that if we agree that we have an absence of critical thinkers in society, in the Ummah, then we can't just blame people for not thinking critically. We have to see why it is that despite having all of these structures and resources and infrastructure at our disposal, why it is that we're not producing critical thinkers. And that's a difficult discussion to have, because that discussion demands that we have to call out what is wrong with what is our celebrated structures and celebrated practices, let alone the celebrated personalities in our midst. Because the moment you are defined by who you follow, you've got a problem. You're supposed to be defined by what it is about what they're sharing, what they offering that resonates, that has merit. But how do you determine that merit if you're not a critical thinker? Because critical thinkers, they don't comply for the sake of compliance. Critical thinkers want to understand why. There's an example that comes to mind that I always use with my clients when they talk about how it is they're so tested and so trialed by life and things are so difficult and everything else. And I keep telling them one simple thing, which is awareness. The more aware you are, the more responsible you are. And to demonstrate the point, here's a simple example. Imagine you've got 3 people working for you, right? These 3 people that are working for you, you give them a task to do. So the first person you give the task to, they just accept the task, they go, they get the task done, and they're done with it. And they go back to chilling, whatever it is that they were doing. The second person, before they do the task, they ask you, why must I do this? Now, of course, if you're an immature leader, you're going to think that your authority is being questioned, rather than recognizing that they just want to understand what's the benefit of doing this, right? So the second person asks why, and you explain to them why, because you developed your maturity and you can explain why without feeling attacked. And they then understand why, so they go in, they're a bit more meticulous, they're a bit more diligent in how they're applying it, because they understand the value of what it is that they're doing, right? And because they connect with that value of it, that task isn't just a task. It's not something that they want to do. Then you have the third person who doesn't just ask you why. They want to know, well, okay, I understand why we have to do this, but what's the purpose? What's the consequence of doing this? So not just why must we do it, but also what am I impacting when doing it? And if you have the emotional maturity to offer that explanation and the wisdom and the understanding of why you're asking them to do something, if you have that understanding and you can explain that to them, that third person is going to be that much more diligent and that much more dedicated and focused to the quality of what they're doing in that task, because they also understand how it's going to have a knock-on effect. So they don't just care about getting it out of the way because that's what they're responsible for. They accept the responsibility for the impact that they have on the broader environment and the operation around them. And the moment you have that kind of awareness, you now have a critical thinker. Because awareness breeds responsibility. It demands that you have to be more take responsibility for what you're aware of. Whether or not you embrace that responsibility is a reflection of your self-worth, of what you hold yourself accountable for. And that then is on self-esteem. And that self-esteem is then what drives how it is that we show up. Because what do we want to be associated with? Are we going to do the bare minimum because that's what we can get away with? And we're too busy not wanting to have other people tell us what we must do and how we must do it and all of that. So it's just a job and all of that. That's self-esteem, self-respect that drives that kind of mentality, right? So between the three people, the question then comes up, which one of the three feels more trialed, more tested, more responsible? Some people say it's the first person because they were given a task to do. No. It's the third person because they have a greater understanding of what's the gravity, what's the importance, what's the value of what they're doing. So they must be sure that they do it correctly because they're not only worried about whether they did what they were told, but they want to know that what they did not have a negative consequence to others. They didn't want to be a harm to others. That, in a nutshell, is what's lacking in the Ummah. We're so focused on what's in it for us. Everything is focused on what's in it for us, including our charitable efforts, that we give charity because we think it's going to raise our standing. It's going to raise our level in Jannah, in heaven. Or it's going to be beneficial for our rizq, for our provision, for our sustenance, our earnings. It's never just about, do you see the struggle of your brother or your sister? Why are you not acting on that? Why are you doing it because it's a religious duty? So, moving on from that, because we can also spend an entire episode just talking about that side of it, right? But moving on from that, we then get to the next question that this brother asked me, which is the overload of information in the digital age making people more critically aware, or does it reinforce or echo chambers and confirmation bias? Excellent question again, right? I honestly believe that the only reason why we get flooded with information is because we go onto social media and we don't know what we're looking for. We're looking just to be distracted or to be entertained. Or we're looking to just find out what's happening. We don't have a specific purpose. And the specific purpose is not about what you want from social media. It's about what you're doing in your life that has purpose, and then you go to social media to support that or to give you a breather from that. But your focus in life is not about what you find online. It's about what you're doing in your actual life, in real life, IRL and all of that nonsense, right? So if you don't have purpose in your real life, then you're going to be completely overwhelmed with everything you come across online. And that sense of feeling overwhelmed, it's like information overload. I can't do anything about this, so I can't just keep looking at this kind of content because it's making me feel bad because I can't do anything about it, all of that nonsense. Then you start avoiding that. And you don't realize that that avoidance or the overconsumption of it, it increases your insensitivity towards what's happening. Because you've now made up your mind. You've decided, hey, yeah, I can't do that. And the ones who are like extremely intense about that kind of content, like content about the genocide or content about injustice and things like that, the reason why most of them are so intense about it is because it resonates with their personal experiences. If something resonates with your personal experiences and then you commit to it, that's not necessarily critical thinking. That's not necessarily purposeful. That's just a familiarity of struggle that draws you into it to say, yes, I know what it feels like to be treated that way and I don't want anyone else to be treated that way. That in itself is not a bad thing, but understand what is your driving motivator, what is your driving factor for that, right? So the overload of information, it's only there if you expose yourself to it. It's not that you pick up your phone and suddenly your phone demands that you have to pay attention to it. Why did you pick up your phone in the first place? And if you can't answer that question, if it's just because you've got nothing better to do, you're bored, you need to get a break from life and all of that, or you're going online to look for a partner or doing something or the other, you need to be purposeful, mindful about this is why I'm doing this, right? If you don't have that mindfulness, that purpose in your life, then you're going to be subject to what is thrown at you. And you're going to feel as if you have to respond and select from what is thrown at you. You won't be able to push it out of the way and say, that I'm not interested in that. I'm looking for something specific. And then you hone your focus onto specifically what it is that you're looking for, because you have purpose in why that is important. If you have a problem that you're trying to solve, you're going to look for that specific content. If in the process of looking for that specific content, you get ads and you get reels and you get entertainment that distracts you, if that problem is an important problem, you're going to be pressed with urgency, but like, get this annoyance out of my way. I need answers to this problem. And that is a demonstration of why it is that if you don't have purpose in your life, something that you believe has urgency, has impact, has importance, has weight, that defines the quality of life and the impact that you want to have. If you don't have that going for you in your life, in your real life, then everything online is going to distract you. And again, that's because absence of critical thinking. Critical thinking demands a very high level of mindfulness. How can we encourage independent thought without pushing people into cynicism or contrarianism for its own sake? Well, my understanding is that you only focus on deconstructing other people's arguments because you're defensive, not because you find a problem with their argument. Because if you deconstruct, if you challenge someone's argument just for the sake of challenging it, to point out to them how they're wrong about something, but you don't follow it up with helping them to understand why it's wrong and what's better than that. What's a better way to look at it? Why haven't you considered this? Why haven't you considered that? Did you know about this? Having that kind of an engagement, that requires a level of maturity that most people don't possess. And I say this because if you looked at Mehdi Hassan's recent Jubilee debate, there you can see how it is that people who just have a platform because they feel strongly about something but are not well informed about it get taken to shreds with someone who actually knows what they're talking about. How many Mehdi Hassans have we got in the Ummah? Very few. Very, very few. How many Sami Hamdis have we got in the Ummah? Few. Why? Because doing things with excellence is seen as extra. It's like, why you want to be all that? Why are you trying to make yourself look so good? Why are you trying to be so finicky about all of these things? People see it as an annoyance, as an irritation, and it's like, hey, if this is good enough, why must you always do more than that? That's why we can't launch or mount a meaningful response to the attack on the Ummah. Because we think everything is extra. It's like, no, we've got structures for that, legal structures, institutional structures, UN structures, all of these structures that we outsource our accountability to so that we don't have to take action. And that's another way that we lose critical thinking. Your cynicism is because of what it is that you hold as doubts and as ridicule about what you see around you. And that is just an indulgence. Cynicism without purpose behind it, without moving beyond the cynicism, that's just self-indulgence. And if you're just going to be self-indulgent in that way, with wanting to be able to point out how this one is wrong and that one is wrong, and you never understand this and you don't know what I've been through and all of that, that doesn't add value to anyone's life. It just makes you feel better about being heard or about having an excuse for why you don't have to do more. So cynicism, if you're a cynical person by nature, but you don't do more than just being cynical, then your self-respect is not where it needs to be. Everything comes down to self-respect and self-esteem. Everything. So if it sounds like I'm just harping on the same thing all the time, it's not because I don't have anything else to offer in that regard. I'm telling you, if you don't have a meaningful connection with what you hold yourself accountable for, who you are, what you stand for, and what impact you want to have, what you believe is worth fighting for, and all of that, if you don't have a meaningful connection with all of that, then you're following someone else's lead. And that in itself is not a problem. It's just you need to understand that that's what you're doing. Because when you're doing that, it means that where you are required to lead, you're not going to lead because you don't see yourself as a leader. But here's the thing, every single one of us leads in some domain of our life. And if you don't realize this, then you are going to create more problems than solutions, and you're going to have a negative impact on the people around you. And you're going to wonder why it is that everyone's always got a problem with you. So cynicism, it's good for entertainment value. It's not a good way to live life. Critically thinking, can it be effectively taught, or is it primarily developed through experience and exposure to diverse perspectives? Critical thinking can't be taught. It's something that has to be almost nurtured. You have to create an opportunity for someone to think critically. If you tell someone how they must think, that's not teaching them critical thinking. That's telling them how they must think. If you give them a method and a process and a framework for how it is they must solve a problem, that's not critical thinking. Critical thinking is about having the ability to navigate and break down a problem into pieces that makes it more understandable so that you understand the relationship between things, and you can therefore then intervene at the most appropriate point to solve the problem. You can intervene at the contributing factors so that you solve the root cause of the problem rather than solving the symptoms of the problem. And most people, because symptoms of problems are so easy to identify, they're driven into reaction mode to resolving the symptoms of problems, and they think that they're actually doing a great thing. All you're doing is you're just delaying the inevitable, because eventually the root cause is going to contaminate other areas. And if you're not aware of that, you're going to keep thinking that, hey, sign of the hour, things are getting worse because, this is just part of the day of judgment approaching and all of that, prophecies this and prophecies that. No, it's because you're caught up in the reaction cycle. It's because you're caught up in believing that what you're reacting to is what's important, rather than looking at how it is that you're getting drawn into that reaction cycle because you don't have a grounded point of view of your own that informs you about why it is that this problem exists in the first place. The easiest thing to do is to react. The difficult thing to do is to understand whether your reaction has merit or not, and then to hold yourself accountable for that. So critical thinking can't be effectively taught. Critical thinking is a consequence of the kind of structure you take people through when you're educating them, both in the home and in the formalized institutions of knowledge. So standardized testing conflicts with critical thinking. Standardized testing doesn't allow people to think critically because it's looking for a specific answer. So you have to give the answer they're looking for, not the answer that makes sense to you. And then if you give the answer that makes sense to you, not the answer they're looking for, there's no opportunity for engagement there, because our educator to learner ratio is so ridiculously insane, right? Which then brings me to another important point, which is how much of what it is that we're learning in schools and madrasas, in religious schools as well, how much of that is outsourced parenting, because parents are not even having that kind of quality engagement with their children at home. How many parents are so distracted that they don't realize that they're trusting someone to raise their children while they're beating themselves up for not being able to raise their children well? Critical thinking. Critical thinking is not a luxury. It's something that in the absence of that, you go through life blindly wondering why it is that things never go your way. And because we have so many people in positions of religious influence, they then convince us that when things are not going your way, that's just a test. It's a test from Allah. It's taqdeer, it's fate playing out, and you must just embrace it and have patience with it. No. If you're not aware of what you're doing to contribute to the struggles that you're facing, then you're going to blame everything else but yourself for contributing that. And in the process, you're going to abdicate accountability for the impact you have on others, because you're going to say, well, it's not my fault. Look, I'm trying my best. So this is just your test. You must make sabr. I'm doing what I can. No. You have to be effective. You have to exercise excellence and mastery and understanding in how you go about doing what it is that you're required to do. And in the process, you will then raise the bar and you will solve problems instead of creating new problems while the original problem remains unsolved. Are there historical periods where critical thinking was more widespread in society, and what lessons can we draw from them? This is something that I always love, because historical periods that we love to reference. As Muslims, we love to reference the 700 years, the golden years of Islam, where we were the leaders in medical and industrial and technical and astronomy and all of these fields of study and excellence where we demonstrated excellence and innovation and forward thinking, critical thinking skills were brought to bear on it. And we always talk about this. If it wasn't for Muslims, you wouldn't have coffee. If it wasn't for Muslims, you wouldn't have surgeries, surgical procedures and surgical instruments, and you wouldn't understand how the eye works and the and human anatomy. And look at how advanced the Quran was, that it talked about the embryonic stages long before anyone even had a microscope to be able to identify things at that level of detail and all of this. This is how it is that we reference something that we're not responsible for, and we take pride from that without actually adding to that. My question is this: if you want to claim such a heritage, what have you done to build on it? If you want to claim the pride of association with such a massive heritage that has been stolen by the Europeans and bastardized and resold to us as if it's their knowledge and all of that, if you want to have that kind of a discourse, that kind of a conversation, and you want to push that agenda and push that narrative, my question is simple. What are you doing to honor that legacy? How have you taken that legacy and built on it? Or are you now just another drone who wants to demand that people respect your way of life? Because look what we did. It's like, it always reminds me of this teacher that I had in school, a total ass. And I'll say that without restraint because he was a total ass. Always looking to get attention from the girls in the class because he was just such a puny man. And one of the things that he used to also repeatedly tell us about is how it is that in India, they were wearing silk garments when the Europeans were still barbarians in the Dark Ages and all of that. And I was saying, okay, great. How did you progress on that? Are you still so stuck in that past achievement that you haven't made any progress beyond it? And that's what happens when you blindly follow and when you ritualize your accomplishments. And you ritualize how those accomplishments were achieved. And then that becomes like tradition and custom, and you don't dishonor your ancestors and your forefathers and your family lineage and all of that because this is the way we've always done it. That's stupidity, that's ignorance, that's the complete absence of critical thinking. You have to understand what was it innate in the way they functioned, the way they thought, the way they saw things, the way they collaborated. What was it that allowed them to have such great accomplishments during that time? Because I can guarantee you it's the abandonment of that caused their downfall, which is why we're talking about them as a golden age rather than as a prevailing wisdom that we actually still benefit from. We've lost the plot, haven't we? In a big way, in a big way. We're such traditionalists and ritualists that we assume that our association with those traditions and rituals is what emphasizes our superiority of thought and understanding and wisdom. No, it doesn't. If you're doing something because someone else told you to do it, you'll get the immediate benefit of it, but you won't be able to benefit others from it because your focus on it and your intentions behind it is tainted. So coming back to the historical periods where it demonstrated critical thinking, you know the kind of stuff that you see now about the Ottoman Empire that people want to celebrate? Yeah, that's the absence of critical thinking. Because we're still trying to demonstrate how amazing they were so long ago. And the only reason we can demonstrate that is because our level today is so low that something that was achieved hundreds of years ago is seen as wow. Not because it was achieved hundreds of years ago, but because something that was achieved hundreds of years ago in present contemporary life is still wow. And yes, you can celebrate that amazing achievement of theirs. But you also have to question, why is it that that's all we got going for us? Celebrating our legacy, celebrating our heritage, not considering what it is that we're doing with it. How have we honored it? How have we shown that we've learned from it and we're building on it so that the next generation can build on that? The only thing we're building on these days is wealth. The accumulation of wealth, the inheritance of wealth, the legacy of wealth. That's all we're worried about these days. And we assume that by some stretch of the imagination is what implies excellence. It doesn't. It's self-indulgence. To want to be celebrated because you took care of X number of generations after you left this world. What value is that? I once read something that said something to the effect that if you want to see a persecuted soul, I'll show you a child with a trust fund. The absence of being able to accomplish things destroys your sense of self. And then you go looking for that sense of self in the wrong places. Anyway, back to the issue at hand, critical thinking. Well, in fact, in a way, I'm hoping that we can see that there's a golden thread through all of this where the absence of critical thinking or the abandonment of critical thinking because of our fixation on tradition and custom and cultural norms and honoring our ancestors and all of that, that is what prevents us from actually living in the true spirit of what it is that they lived with. At some point, we took people who are our teachers and we turned them into icons and saints that we just weren't going to even try to equal or improve on. Who said we were supposed to do that? Who said that we were supposed to revere people who accomplished things in history to such a point that that becomes our golden standard? We live in a time when a 10-year-old can start a $1 million business. Think about it. A 10-year-old, 12-year-old can earn millions online through a business idea because that's how much capability and access and resources they have at their disposal. And we're still celebrating someone from centuries ago who didn't have a fraction of the kind of technology and capability that we have access to now. That, to me, says that we're failing, not we're improving. And the ones who provide those technologies as utilities for us, they're the ones that's a very small group of people who are actually critical thinkers. But the masses, because we lack critical thinking in the masses, for the majority of the people around, we don't look at that from a critical thinking perspective and think, how can we innovate further and how can we take these disparate technologies or capabilities and create something even more amazing? We look at how it is that we can use it to line our pockets. How do you get a job in that industry? How do you use it to pay your bills? How do you use it to accumulate wealth? We've lost the plot. And now, in terms I've said this in this episode alone, we've lost the plot. How do we balance the need for critical thinking with the necessity of collective action, given that excessive skepticism can sometimes lead to inaction? Like I said about the cynicism, excessive cynicism or skepticism is because of a collective erosion of critical thinking. What happens if you put a whole lot of people in a room where every one of them are critical thinkers? What would you need to have a productive discussion there? You would need everyone to be aligned on what problem they want to solve. If you take 10 critical thinkers and throw them at the same problem and they're all equally invested in solving that problem, how long do you think it will take them to solve that problem? Hundreds of years? No, probably a couple of hours. Now take a bunch of people who are looking to be celebrated for their contribution, team effort and all of that nonsense, participation awards. People who want to be celebrated and respected and revered for their degrees and their qualifications and their background. And you throw them into a room and you ask them to solve that problem. Are they going to collaborate or are they going to be competing with each other to see who can get the most credit for having solved that problem? Collective action is a myth. Collective action becomes the solution when you had a collective failure. Look at Palestine. Think I'm lying? Look at Palestine. We fail our families, we fail our community, we fail our society, we fail in the business space. We've become attention whores and accumulators of wealth and looking for reactions and social stature. That's why we've lost humanity. And that's what makes it possible for Palestine to happen. Because they know that you're so invested in what you want for yourself that you're not going to worry about someone else's problem. And the only thing you're going to do is you're going to talk about the moral outrage that it creates. But that's it. So where's the collective action? Collective action is not in any way hampered by critical thinking. Critical thinking is what prevents the need for collective action. You see, democracy, again, and I will pick on democracy as much as I pick on mainstream mental health. Democracy dumbs you down, right? It convinces you that regardless of the merits of your argument, if you can get enough people that agree with you, then you have merit. How stupid is that? The dumbest way of governing ever, and everyone's pushing for more of it. Someone once asked me, what's the alternative to democracy? And of course, my answer left them like surprised, like, how can you say that? My answer is simple: theocracy. But here's where it gets interesting. You see, if you wall-eyed, if you're myopic in the way you look at things, then you'll think theocracy automatically implies that someone's religion needs to prevail. No. Let's assume that you have a secular country right now. The theocracy that you would then implement in that country would be that the constitution that is already agreed to in the country, that constitution becomes your source of theocracy, your religious scripture, so to speak, right? And how you govern against that has to be based on merit, relative to that being your authoritative source. Now, what have you got with democracy? Is that you can operate however you want to as long as you don't violate what's in the constitution. See the problem? The one is looking for a gap, the other one is looking to honor. So how do you then govern? How do you make decisions? Simple. Referendums. I'd rather go through a referendum every 6 months to be able to provide public input on issues of merit than to have to give carte blanche to someone to run amok for 5 years. And then you have to wait for the 5-year period for them to do as much damage as they can possibly do within the confines of the law and all of that nonsense before you get an opportunity to potentially change it. And that's also hit and miss. So now you, again, someone who is great at public speaking and that they rally the masses and they get put into power to replace the previous corrupt government. And you only realize afterwards that they were just corrupted in a different way, pushing a personal agenda and all of that. And then they can, because of the democratic process, they have the opportunity to distort and contaminate the constitution itself by pushing through changes and things just because they have a majority vote. It's stupidity of the highest degree. I don't know. I can't understand how anyone sees merit in democracy. Government of National Unity did more for South Africa than, and I'm not talking about the current one. The current one is just an absolute joke. It's actually a morbid, distasteful joke. But the original government of National Unity that handled the transition, they achieved more than any government that came after that. So why didn't we just continue using that model? Because democracy. Democracy makes it possible for the ones with resources to manipulate you. That's it. Look at America. You want to talk about the absence of critical thinking? America. You want to talk about the absence of critical thinking? Israel. What would it take to get people to believe that they have this divinely inspired right, even though they're not themselves religious? A massive amount of self-indulgence. What causes self-indulgence? A lack of self-respect. A great amount of self-loathing. Because then you are enamored, you feel good about your accomplishments because of how brazen it is rather than because there's merit in it, value in it. So now you take a whole lot of self-loathing people and you let them loose. What do you think is going to happen? Victims make the worst oppressors. Israel. Prove me wrong. So critical thinking and what we need in the Ummah. Let's try and distill that down very quickly because, wow, I've been speaking for a long time. So critical thinking in the Ummah, I believe, has been eroded because we've created saints out of regular people. We've become horribly ritualistic and rigid in how it is that we approach teachings. We've actively discouraged people from being able to understand things unless they understand it the way we tell them they're supposed to understand it. We have institutional structures that place merit on titles and tokens of association rather than actual substance in what is being presented. And that is why you have people who are now part of clerical structures, where they became part of the clerical structure purely because of academic achievement in the learning process of acquiring that title, and then that gives them the license to go and run amok in society and give absolutely atrocious advice to people that destroys relationships, destroys homes, destroys families, but they never ever held accountable for it. Which brings me to the point of leadership without accountability. Leadership without accountability is opportunism. And if you can prove to me that there is any accountability in the Muslim leadership in the world right now, accountability, not where they might issue an apology from time to time or something, but accountability. In the same way that you held accountable at work when you're working for a boss, there's consequences, there's reprimands, and the consequences are not small. It's not just like we can dock your pay or something. You get fired. You get thrown out of the position. You're not allowed to practice in that role in that organization any longer. Show me where that level of accountability exists in any of the Muslim structures. It doesn't, which means that we have a lot of well-intentioned opportunists, right? And that sounds harsh. It's not intended to be harsh. It's the fact that if you don't hold yourself accountable to the people that you claim to be serving, then why are you there? Who's allowed to question if they don't have some sort of qualification? I remember there was a time when one of the governors that were appointed by, I think it was Umar radiallahu anh, the people complained about him, and he was a very highly respected Sahaba at the time, or Sahabi. And when the people complained about him, he was summoned to explain himself about the complaints of the people. And yes, he had a good reason for each of the complaints that they had against him. But the point is, he was held accountable for answering to the masses. Where do we see that these days? We can run amok from any organization that claims to have merit. Look at how many halal certification bodies we've got. Look at how many charity organizations we've got. Look at how many institutions we have that claim to be the correct institution for how it is that they define the syllabus and the structures with which to teach our children about Islam. We can't even agree on any of that. Look at how many sects we've got, madhabs, how many debates we have about your origins, racism, classism, the elites. A long time ago, I heard someone commenting about how it is that this mosque in Joburg is known as the House of Lords, and that's the House of Commons, and all of that. And I'm thinking, seriously? That's how deeply entrenched it is that we can actually speak about it lightly in conversation. We've lost our plot because we've lost sight of what is important about the beliefs of Islam, not because we're not doing the rituals correctly. It's because we're ritualized. We've lost the character of the Sunnah, and we've lost empathy and compassion and understanding and wisdom. So I'll ask again, of the great legacy that we always lay claim to, how much of that legacy are we honoring and building on and using it as a foundation from which to launch our efforts into how it is that we live our lives, versus how much of that is seen as, oh, that's our history and we should be proud of it, so you shouldn't apologize for being a Muslim. Islam was never about whether you're a Muslim by name or not. It's about your character, your conduct. So as a Muslim, do you conduct yourself with excellence? As a Muslim, do you have the ability to think critically, or are you afraid of thinking for yourself because your Mulana said you're not supposed to? As a Muslim, what accountability are you accepting for the state in which you find the Ummah, for the state in which you find your family, for the state in which you find your community? As a Muslim, how is it that you are bringing yourself to bear on that in a way that is not selfish by design, that doesn't serve your own personal needs first before it serves the Ummah? As a Muslim, how is it that you're making yourself available to be able to have important discussions without being afraid of people having a problem with you for what you want to discuss? What is your contribution as a Muslim to the Ummah? Not charity, not acts of kindness. That has its place, and alhamdulillah, mashallah, if you do that, that's a start. That's not the objective. How is it that you are changing what is institutionally degraded in the Ummah? we're so focused on feeling proud about what we're associated with that we don't realize that that pride itself undermines the barakah of our efforts in that regard. We just keep creating more and more elitism in our community rather than creating true cohesion and collaboration. So, as a Muslim, what is your accountability for what is happening in Palestine? What is your accountability for what's happening here, right in our own country, in our neighborhood? For the corruption that we see in the Muslim businesses and Muslim businessmen who are participating in that corruption in government that we all complain about. How much do we hold ourselves accountable? Or is that supposed to not be done publicly because we want to protect our reputation? We want to hide our shame. The absence of critical thinkers in the Ummah is directly at the doorstep of the generations of leaders that have gotten us to this point. And the ones who are leading that got us to this point, what is your contribution towards changing it? Or are you just forcing more of the same and blaming the people for not cooperating and blaming the fitna on the West and blaming secularism and blaming atheists for pushing evolutionist theories and sexual education agendas in our schools and that? Are you blaming all of that? Or are you recognizing that the only reason why they have any momentum in doing any of that is because we've failed as an Ummah? This victim mentality in response to what it is that we see degraded around us, that victim mentality is self-indulgent. There's no place for that. What are you contributing towards sustaining that or improving it, correcting it, challenging it, creating an alternative for it? How many Muslim businesses are still unconcerned about the fact that they're selling Zionist products? And I mean unconcerned. I'm not talking about they have genuinely no alternatives. They're unconcerned about it because it's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. What's this little bit going to affect that? It's about your conscience, your self-respect, what you want to be associated with. Critical thinking. Do we have enough critical thinkers to be able to have a conversation about critical thinking? I'm not so sure about that. At least I can say with a fair amount of certainty that in the personalities that dominate public discourse in our community, we don't have a critical mass of critical thinkers in that space. And if I'm wrong, challenge the merit of what I'm saying. Prove me wrong, not because I'm important and you need to prove me wrong. I'm saying, prove me wrong. Tell me how it is that I might be missing something completely blatant that I'm just not exposed to. Show me where the critical thinking is. There isn't critical thinking. Because we're too fixated on rituals. And we're too fixated on sectarianism. On calling other Muslims murtad and kafir and all of these things because somehow we acquired some permission from Allah to speak on his behalf. What is your contribution to the state of the Ummah? That's the simple question we all need to answer. And if you can answer that honestly, sincerely, then you have an opportunity to build on that self-respect and that conviction that you are responsible for contributing to the Ummah. I don't know. I don't even know how to end this episode. What is the point of it? Critical thinking, critical thinking, critical thinking. If you're in a leadership role, are you applying yourself critically in that role? Or are you applying yourself within the context of what it is that your donors will allow? And if you're a donor, Are you funding initiatives because of how it reflects your social standing, personal agenda, or are you genuinely trusting the excellence of the knowledge and the leadership of the people you are funding to put those funds to best use? If you're a team member of one of these initiatives, are you doing things because you're told to do it that way, or do you understand with conviction why it is that it's important? Do you see yourself as a representative of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or do you see yourself as a representative of that organization? Do you see yourself as a representative of what Islam stands for, or do you see yourself as a representative of what charity looks like? And so on. We're so far from where we should be as an Ummah that it becomes quite difficult to understand, like, where's step one? Where do you think step one is? I think step one is self-respect. But self-respect is difficult to connect with if we're led by a lot of leaders who lack it themselves. And I say they lack it themselves because of the way they conduct themselves in public spaces and how they stand and scream and shout from the member, and how it is that the young ones, even especially, want to be so condescending and cynical and rhetorical in their approaches when they're actually advising their elders. There's so many things that's wrong with it. And if we're not willing to question the actual institutions that sustain this kind of dysfunction in the Ummah, then what's the point of the institutions? Where do we start? Where do we stop? I don't know. I'm Zaid Ismail. Don't even know if this will reach the air or not. A'udhu billah.